Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Emilee Harris, author of STEAMY historical romances, and today I'm introducing my brand new book, A Haunting Love. Just in time for Halloween season, if you're a fan of either paranormal romance or The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, or both, you'll want to stick around. Welcome! I am so happy to finally be back with a new book to share. This one has been a long time in the waiting, but so much fun. I've been itching to tell you about it for over a month. I'm worried I might get a little bit long-winded, so I've divided the video into themes with timestamps, so feel free to kind of skip around. Let's start with the backstory, shall we? A Haunting Love is my first paranormal romance, with one of the characters being a ghost. It's also a retelling of one of my all-time favorite stories, The Ghost and Mrs. Muir. And that was written by Josephine Leslie under the name R.A. Dick, and she published it in 1945. I first came across The Ghost and Mrs. Muir as a child, when I happened to watch the 1947 film adaptation starring Rex Harrison and Gene Tierney. That movie sparked both a love of the story and a massive crush on good old sexy Rexy. The story involves a young widow of Edwardian-era England who moves out to the coast with her children and finds herself sharing space with her home's previous owner, a deceased sea captain. It focuses on the widow and the development of a lifelong, mutually caring relationship between her and the cantankerous spirit of the captain. It was a number of years before I realized the movie was based on a book, but once I read the original, I loved it even more. The movie cut out several significant characters and events from the story, but I actually prefer that, as I find the latter part of the book drags a bit and really didn't like one of the characters. Something I think the book does better is hinting at the romance in conversations between the characters. The movie provides this more visually, of course, but the book has some wonderful quotes. The arguable best of these, however, didn't come from either source. It came from the later TV series starring Edward Mulhare and Hope Lang. Cue the next crush.
I never once allowed a woman on board my ship. But if I'd known you 100 years ago, I would have carried you off to sea and shown you how beautiful the world can be. I'd have met my match in you. Lord knows I waited for you and hunted for you. How was I to know you hadn't even been born yet? So you won't remember any of this when you wake up, madam. You shan't have that advantage over me. How sad that you were not born in my time, nor I in yours.
The show ran between 1968 and 1970. Because it was a series, it created more of a mix between the original story as backdrop and completely new and different episode stories within that context. The show also moved the story location from England to New England and widened the gap between the characters, so the captain remained of the Victorian era, but the widow was now a fully independent working woman of the 1960s. Why all the background info, you ask? Well, for my version, these were all big influences. I tried to highlight aspects of each which I found the most meaningful or fun. I mentioned it took me a good while to write this book. A big part of that was just the fear of how it would be received. About midway through the book, I take a massive detour from the original plot and end up with a completely different outcome, which pleases me, but may upset die-hard fans. To any of you who may be watching, my sincere apologies. Please keep in mind this is essentially a work of fan fiction and in no way indicates any dissatisfaction with the original. Aside from this most important hang-up, though, I had also no clue how I was going to write a full novel with just one point of view. Romances typically have two, and from a reader perspective, I feel pretty gypped when one of those ends up lacking. But I wanted to stick to the feel of the original, which only has one point of view, that of the widow. To my great surprise, the single point of view wasn't that terrible. I think this had to do with the dialogue, which I'll explain more momentarily. So now with that lead-in, let me point out some of the similarities and differences between my book and the source materials. Original era. I'm not a fan of mixing present and past, and my favorite era is Edwardian, so I stuck with that. New England. Completing my 6-book Currents of Love series set in Regency England and faced with continuing work on another 4-book Regency series, I honestly needed a change of scenery for a bit. Most-ish of the plot. The first quarter of the book I kept practically identical to the plot of the original book, as this sets up most of the important elements for our characters. That said, I did put my own spin on things and rearranged events a bit. Darn the torpedoes! My readers already know that I'm not a fan of swearing in my books. I don't think it adds anything to the story and is not necessary for making things more realistic. That said, I have on occasion used the word damn if I felt it was warranted. On rare occasion, I do receive complaints about this, so I'm warning you now, this book contains the ghost of a sea captain. Fun fact, for anyone who is only aware of the movie and or TV series, the word blast is used due to censorship in those industries at the time, not because it was accurate to the story. As a nod to all previous editions, I include both words. The most important factor for me, though, was the dialogue between the characters. Honestly, if the sarcastic and humorous commentary, especially from the captain, hadn't been there in the book, I probably would never have fallen for this story as hard as I did. It really forms the backbone of the work for me, and I ended up having a lot of fun attempting to recreate it. Once we get a bit past the first quarter of the book is where I decided to go for broke and just veer off the beaten path. My first outline stuck much more to the original, but I found it difficult to flesh out in new ways, so I decided to take inspiration from a few personal topics of interest and see if I could play with them in the context of this story. Therefore, and again, this is fair warning to those who hate remakes, my version either comments on or alludes to the following: reincarnation theory, seances, the American Theosophical Society, asylums, and the role of women in society during the very early years of the 20th century. I will be delving into several of these topics in more detail in the coming weeks, both in videos and in my subscriber newsletter. So if either of those options sound interesting to you, you can subscribe here or the follow the link in the description to sign up for the newsletter. One final note for anyone who is not so interested in the steamy part of steamy romances. I took this opportunity to attempt portraying the typical romance love scene in a more subconscious way, meaning no magically materializing a ghost for the sake of a love scene and then dematerializing him again. I cannot stand when other authors do that. I can't say I was entirely pleased with the outcome of this experiment, but it was something new and interesting. A Haunting Love is currently on pre-order on Amazon, linked below of course, and if you are willing to leave a review on Amazon in exchange for a free e-copy of the book, I have advanced copies now available through Booksprout, also linked below. And that is all that I have for the moment, so I hope you're curious about this new book and will take a look. Thank you for watching, and until next week, happy reading.